All right, welcome back to our Survivor Indianapolis Season 5 post-season coverage interviews here. Today we have our third place finisher, Adrienne Butler, with us. Adrienne, let's just jump into your game and talk about some questions we have as to what's going on. So, early game, you're with Siakam, and we know that, like, Neil's whole, you know, go red team, Siakam strong was pretty prevalent. But what was your strategy in those first couple of rounds with Siakam that kept you? Because it seems like were never really a target in those early few rounds. They talked about maybe, I mean, obviously Bailey got voted off, and there was other whisperings of other things possibly happening, but it seemed like you were never really an option. So what do you think that you did to keep you locked in there?
I feel like I initially didn't know enough about the game, or I really didn't, but I played it like I didn't really know enough about the game. I didn't have a huge strategy in the beginning, and I felt like I was enough of a supporting role to not become a target, but also not much of a threat. Like I kind of played that middle ground enough to where at least I think that it didn't make me as much of a threat as maybe I could have been. Or I mean, I not to say anything about me, but just like I didn't appear a huge threat and I also didn't appear like the weakest link, I think.
Yeah.
So,
So we're kind of trying to play the middle ground a little bit.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what were your thoughts in the moment, if you remember? Neil is very heavily preaching this Siakam strong stuff. And later on in the game, there's a moment where you hear, I think it's actually the episode where Sonny gets voted off. Annie is complaining because Chris is mad at Annie for sharing all the information from Advantage Island. And she says, well, Neil made us like all be very like kumbaya, we're all together. And so I felt like I couldn't hide any information. I felt like I had to tell everything to everybody. So was that strategy something that you felt like you were cool with and on board for it, or was it something that you wished could have died sooner?
Honestly, I was for it felt the Siakam camaraderie felt very safe to me, and so I
Hmm.
was supportive of it and on board. And I honestly, through that switch, even like later in the game, felt like
Hmm.
I really wanted to carry through. Just because it felt like a safety net to me, like we were all still,
Sure.
together and strong. So
It seemed like it worked for you, especially early, and then in the swap, when you get swapped over to you, I mean, you're technically on the blue tribe on the swap, but it was mostly red people
yeah.
on that swap. So when you first saw, like, okay, this is our new tribe, we've drawn rocks, this is our new group, what were your first thoughts when you first saw this is your new team?
Oh, immediately we're eliminating the blue that are left. Like there's not even there wasn't even a question. Like Siakam strong. Like we
Yeah,
we knew that definitely carried over, and we knew what our plan was. I think. I mean, it
yeah,
felt like we all still knew what was going on. So
yeah, because that group was you and Drew and Leah, and then Moretta and Mason. And then was there a sixth person there? I think that might have been it. You five. I think it was 5-5.
yeah,
No, it was six because you had Leah adding into your team. So Annie was with you. Annie was with you.
yeah,
So yeah, because so you would have had four original red to the two of Mason and Moretta. So you get in this situation where you um, have the majority and you lose the first challenge. You vote Mason out, and then you are in a spot where everyone has an equal shot to win immunity because it was the axe throwing competition where both teams were going to tribal council, and Moretta, the only other person that was not on original Siakam, gets voted off. So now there's this easy alliance that has been working for you with the other girls from Siakam, and Drew's the one on the outside, except for it's pretty common knowledge that he has an idol. So we see you and Annie talk. We see you and Annie and Moretta and Leah talk, and Leah brings up, and you also bring up a couple times, he has an idol. What should we do? So were you guys ultimately just resigned to the fact that like we might just have to wait and see what he does and hope he doesn't play it, or were there other things that were talked about that you could do to try to work around the idol?
I don't think we strategized around the idol much.
Yeah,
I felt like I mean, he was kind of like the next person that we had kind of wanted to knock out, and we just felt like we couldn't. So I feel like that kind of came to a full stop, unfortunately.
yeah. So there are a couple of like really high level strategy things that you guys could have done. But given that most of you don't really have a lot of background in the actual game, I wasn't surprised by seeing what happened, and not to be like judgmental about it. It's just you don't. I wouldn't know either if I hadn't watched all these seasons more than once. So that's a little bit of a an obvious and like understandable blind spot. So then, given that you knew Merida couldn't get votes, and Drew had an idol, what was the decision? And I understand it's not like 100% you should have, like, obviously the hindsight is you got voted off, so you should have played your idol. But before you know, it's not 100%. It's like trying to figure it out. Should I play it? Should I not play it? So what was the like why did you end up choosing to not play the idol?
Honestly, I don't think I played that. I obviously didn't play that round very well, but like we know what happened. But I feel like I guess I just didn't think that one fully through because obviously somebody's got to be the target if Drew is not, and we all came to the conclusion that Drew is not, and then I feel like it just kind of fell flat. And I was
Hmm.
on the outside, I felt like nobody was really talking, and I didn't know what we were going to do. So that should have been a very good indicator that I should have played my idol, and I didn't.
Yeah.
So I just kind
Uh,
of thought, yeah.
do you feel like that having a little bit more time to strategize would have helped you like realize that, or was it a matter of being rushed, or was it just like a matter of inexperience?
I think honestly it was inexperience. Like more time may have helped, but honestly I can't even fully remember how I feel like it was kind of quick, right? Like that, like we ended
It,
that conversation about Drew and then we kind of had to go right into
it's usually pretty quick. You guys talked because Annie was at Advantage Island, so you talked to Moretta and Leah for a minute, and then you talked to Annie when she got back to Advantage Island, and then I think the four girls talked another time, and at that point because like of how much the girls kept grouping up, I think that's part of why Drew played the idols. He was like, I see them talking a lot without me, so I feel like it probably is going to be me. And then if you know from your point of view, Drew could pick if he does play the idol, he could pick Annie to vote for, or Leah to vote for, or you. So it's a 1 in 3. So I understand like you weren't just jumping at the idea of playing the idol because it's a 1 in 3. So you know you never know what he's going to do. But obviously hindsight is different because you did get voted off here. So speaking of getting voted off, you're only out for a round or two, maybe even trying to think. It was a couple rounds, and then we had the returning player challenge. So how did you feel going into that? I mean, obviously you ended up winning it and getting back into the game, but uh, did you feel like confident in that challenge? I saw one thing that I want to talk about that you did on the video that I thought was brilliant. But how did you feel before you started the challenge? Were you, because like Neil said, he was kind of resigned, like I'm probably not going to win this challenge. Did you feel confident or did you feel kind of like, I'm not sure?
I was kind of not sure, and then somebody started like really encourage. Was it Chris or somebody really was like, I feel like Adrienne's gonna win. Oh, we had all vote like talked about who they thought was gonna win, and there was a lot more
Hmm.
confidence in me than I felt. I was like, oh, it's whatever. Like I'm just happy to watch and like see what's
Yeah.
going on. And then everybody's like, I feel like Adrienne could win. Like at least a couple people said it. I can't remember
Yeah.
what this was.
Leah definitely did. So, because
Yeah,
she,
I
because,
was like, maybe
yeah.
I could.
Yeah. So you do the one thing that I noticed in the video that I obviously I couldn't have seen it in real time because I had to stay on the driveway to for everyone to come show me their answers. But on the
Mhm.
video, I see several times, and you weren't the only one to do it. I think Anna did it as well once or twice. But you would be reading the question, and if you didn't know it, you would just kind of like wait, and then if a guy came up and picked a ping pong ball, you followed and picked what they picked. So there's more than once I think that you like watched what Chris picked and then picked the ball that which is nothing against that. Is that like obviously you don't ever talk about it. So is that coincidental or were you intentionally watching to see which ball Chris picked?
Well, okay, it wasn't specifically Chris. It was kind of just happenstance, I
Yeah,
think, remembering correctly. Like it was just kind of whoever showed up. But my thought was it was no, it was based on the previous rounds of the game, right?
it was based off of like
Or
the real
real.
show. The real
Yeah.
show, yeah. It was like
So
basic stuff if you watch the real show, but most of you haven't. So
so I felt I can't even remember. I don't think I knew whether or not Chris knew much about the show. My thought was just like, I don't know anything. And so if somebody else thinks that they have the right answer, I may as well try that other
yeah,
than 1 in 4 chance of me getting it right, or just have to keep running back and
true.
so
So yeah, they ended up working out. I mean, it's better to if he and Chris was just funny. He didn't really know much about the show, but he was able to figure out the answers.
Well,
Just
my logic too was like, I mean, if they've been running back and forth as much as I have, they've obviously eliminated some options. And so between that, between their information and mine, I thought it
yeah,
might.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, uh, you had been out of the game for a couple rounds, get back in, and start off pretty strong in an alliance with, and there was talks about two different alliances. There was talks about like blue versus red. There was talks about men versus women. There was talks, and all of those in my interviews afterwards have seemed to have had potential to be real. But the one that ends up carrying you through to the very end is this best class alliance with the IBC group of Chris, Leah, you and Moretta. So
Yeah.
tell me, from your point of view, how did that alliance come to be?
Oh man. I mean, my class, we were such, okay, in school, we were such a strong, there was such a strong camaraderie between my class, and like we were all very united in school. And so immediately Chris said that, and I was like, oh, yeah, like that's what we're doing. We're all, I don't know, it just felt the most reliable. Like,
Yeah,
I don't know, out of all the one, like it felt even that the red team had kind of fallen through at that point, and gender wasn't really like a big distinction. But he said that, and I was like, okay, that's something I can get behind. Like, I feel like we all, nobody's gonna betray to my detriment, obviously. Nobody's going to betray best class, so I'm going to go with that.
so when did do you remember when he mentioned it to you? Was it like after you got back into the game? Was it while you two were voted out?
No, it was after we got back. Well, it was after we got back into the game. And I feel like he just looked at me and said, Adrienne, best class. And I was like, all right, that's it.
Okay.
Like, that's what we're doing. I'm
Yeah.
on like 100%.
So then we see that that kind of gets you guys through for a few rounds. You vote off Drew. You vote off who was I'm trying to remember now who was after Drew, but Drew was like the first big um, casualty, right? Then you get yeah, Annie was pretty close. Yeah, Annie was right after that. So
Yeah.
and which was funny because you I think was Annie getting voted off a part of why you were not always 100% sure about Chris? Because there were a few times where you doubted Chris. Um, you ended up voting with him, obviously, but there's a few times where you talked about in your confessionals that like I'm not sure if Chris is going to be loyal to the end or not. Um, was voting Annie out a part of why you had doubts, or was that not really a part of it?
I don't think it had much to do. I mean, we voted Annie out, and then it's just like logic. Like, you just know one of us has to go next, and I'm not sure who it's going to be.
Yeah,
Also, okay, Brother Henderson, Chris is very a charismatic person, and it just kind of put like
yeah,
very easy to trust, but also that little bit of wary, like, okay, like at some point he's gonna flip the script, and I'm not gonna know what it's gonna happen until it does, which is obviously what happens.
yeah.
So
So
I
so
kind of
get
anticipated maybe a little bit.
so you do think that maybe like you guys should have I don't know I guess it would have had to have been you and Moretta and Moretta seems to have been pretty loyal too so I don't know who you maybe could have used Cameron but you and Cameron didn't really work together much because he was on the original Shebue and you were on the original Siakam so uh it looks like there was obviously some concern there. Chris did use your name as like a decoy, basically. Like he never, he did not intend on voting for you. He obviously ended up voting for you at Final Four, but that was like the last vote. Before that, he never did vote for you, but he told you to your face, "I'm going to use your name as a decoy vote." And did that like really worry you? And why do you think he chose your name instead of somebody else?
I feel like I went back and forth with it. Like, I felt
Yeah.
secure because he was very very good at like, I'm gonna do this, but like it's not real. And
Hmm.
so I felt secure in it, and then I started hearing a little bit of talking and or like seeing people go off, and I was like, okay, now I'm not so sure. But I tried to just be confident in what he had told me and not try to finagle anything crazy and just
Hmm.
trust. And at that point, it worked,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah.
But I had a couple moments, but I tried to keep it together, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. So you do get to the final four with that group, and then at that point, Chris and Leah both vote together. And because Moretta had immunity, it was just you and Chris that because like well actually no it wasn't yeah it was Chris because you and Moretta chose to vote for Chris instead of vote for Leah. Was that always because like it? you guys talked about how at different times it seemed like Moretta was on board to take Chris to the end. Was it always the plan that Chris would be like in your talks that Chris would be voted off at fourth?
Honestly, no. Again, at least me, I didn't think that far ahead. I was
Sure.
really taking it round by round. My strategy was very questionable, and like genuinely throughout the whole game, I think that was pretty apparent. But my strategy is a little bit questionable. But yeah, no, that was not really the plan. It just kind of felt like what made the most sense, and we had to unite against somebody, and so I was very much like, hey, at that point, Brother Henderson, sorry, Chris felt
Yeah.
very much like a threat. Like
Yeah.
that charisma, I felt like he could have united anybody.
Yeah. So you felt
And
like
so I
it,
just, go ahead.
so you just felt like if he was in the final three, he would have won. And
I think so.
yeah. So then you get to the final three with a group that like going into that night as someone who wasn't super involved, obviously, in in the conversations and didn't know exactly who had been pulling the strings between the three of you, Moretta, and Leah. It felt to me like it was pretty much a toss up. I didn't know a whole lot about it, and the vote was pretty split. So what do you think that you could have done, whether it was changing like a vote earlier in the game, or if it was just something you could have done at the last minute in terms of answering questions or that kind of thing? What do you think you could have done to try to get more votes at the end?
I'm not a very, I'm not very good at getting people behind my cause, and I'm not very good at like, I wouldn't consider myself a very charismatic person. And I think that kind of definitely played to my detriment. And I also really didn't think I made very many big moves. Like I kind of just went with the flow and tried to keep myself safe. Like with
Mhm.
Siakam and then with Best Class, it was just self-preservation,
Mhm.
more so than strategy. I think my lack of making very strategic moves pretty much throughout the game, probably I think that could have helped me if I had been a little more strategic throughout the game and then was able to bring those forward in the final three.
Sure. And to give you some credit, you got to the final three. So like there's a lot of people that made lots of big moves and got voted off because they were seen as a threat. You know, you talk about Mason and Chris getting voted off in the way that he did, because you got voted off by an idle play. Chris got voted off earlier because he was seen as a threat. Eli and Drew and Sonya got voted off for being seen as a threat, right? So like you were able to keep your threat level down. The problem was you just could not gain the credit then at the end. Right. So, I mean, that's a part of it is trying to walk that tightrope is really tough. So you were able to do the one part of it really well. Obviously, you got to the end, and it was really outside of that last moment where Chris and Leah voted for you. You were safe pretty much the whole time once you get back into the game. So there's positives to take away, obviously, as well as the fact that you can learn from the fact that you got to the end, didn't quite get enough votes, but getting third place is nothing to scoff at. So congrats on that.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
So I think we're good. We'll wrap it up here. Thanks for coming back on and talking about your game.
Thank you. It was a good time.